think I'd go back to what my colleague and friend at the church group had said to me, which is to fear not. I do feel, Ken, that I worried my 20s away. And I don't want anyone to have to do that because it's not necessary. Choosing to be loved is not a career limiting decision. And in fact, it's actually been the most important thing that happened to me to help my career.
I recently sat down with Fox News host and best-selling author Dana Perino to talk about her career, the journey through the ups, the downs, the unexpected opportunities, and so much more. It's going to really encourage you and equip you to be who you were created to be. Check it out. Well, Dana, it's good to see you again, and I'm excited this time to turn the tables on you and learn more of your story, because as I've done the research on you and read your books, we have a lot in common in that we care deeply about people being their best selves and the coaching and the mentoring. And this is a fun thing on how this has developed for you, and so much mentoring and women coming to you for advice. And so I want to go back into your story. I'm curious about the college years and the degree. And did you see yourself moving into politics? Was that the aim at that point? What were you aiming for?
It wasn't. It really wasn't. So let me back up even further if you don't mind.
Sure.
So in third grade, my dad started this tradition with me where I had to read the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post before he came home from work. Wow. And I had to pick out 2 articles to discuss with him before dinner. And this is partly a way, I encourage dads to do this. And, a hard copy newspaper might be kind of hard to find nowadays. But there's something special about getting off the screens. And I think that my dad did that for a couple of reasons. One, he loves the news and he wanted me to love the news. He also knew that it's really important for girls to learn how to express themselves and their thoughts early on. And, I might pick out a story about butterflies, like whatever it might be. And then he would gently play the devil's advocate or try to help me think things through. So great for reading comprehension, critical skills thinking, and also for girls in particular, I think, and this comes up later on in my books, it's finding a way to have a strong voice where you can express yourself with confidence and grace and dignity in front of a male superior. If you have one of those male bosses that might be intimidating at first, which of course, one of my male bosses was George W. Bush when he was president, and could not have been more lovely to me. But it's pretty intimidating to go into the Oval Office for the first time. And we can talk about how I got kicked out of the Oval Office one time, if you'd like later on.
I do want to hear that story.
It's a good one. And it's pretty funny how it ends. So I grow up loving the news, sharing the news, the love of the news with my dad. At night we would watch, because we lived in Denver, we had the opportunity to see both, like 2 of the nightly news programs. So we could see ABC or NBC and CBS. Sometimes we even watched the PBS McNeil Lehrer News Hour, right? So 60 Minutes came on. I used to be afraid to go outside and play on a Sunday night before 60 Minutes because I didn't want to miss it.
Wow.
Now you can just record it. It's not a big deal. But when I was a kid, you had to be there.
Yeah.
And when I heard that tick, 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 I'd get so excited because I love 60 Minutes. And my dad would do it so that I wouldn't worry about missing it. He would set the alarm on the stove so that I could hear when I was out in the backyard with my sister, so that we wouldn't miss 60 Minutes. And the Muppet Show. I don't want everybody to think that I didn't have any fun. I love the Muppet Show too.
Oh, so I got to ask. Okay, so it's very similar in age. We grew up in the era of the big 3, right? You had Brokaw, Jennings, and Rather. I got to ask you, because I had a favorite, because I watched the evening news with my dad as well. It was just always on. Of those 3, did you have a favorite?
Well, I think, yes, Tom Brokaw was born and raised in South Dakota.
Of course. Right.
I was born in Wyoming, and my family ranches about 80 miles west of Mount Rushmore. So kind of by default, we were a Brokaw family.
I was a Jennings guy, I'll tell you.
And you know what? He was amazing.
He was
Peter
so
Jennings,
smooth.
so good at what he did.
Very authoritative. I trusted Peter Jennings as a kid. So that's fun. Okay, another fun question. Favorite Muppet?
Oh gosh.
I know. This is the hard-hitting stuff that you don't
Kermit,
talk about with him every day.
Kermit's amazing, but he's obviously he's the most obvious choice. I did love Miss Piggy, Fozzie the Bear. And, well, actually, it's funny. It's as I get older, I realize that I really like the two old guys in the balcony the most.
Absolutely my favorite.
They remind me the most of Greg Gutfeld.
That's true. Good call. Okay, so let's take you back to your story. So you grow up, and your dad has cultivated this love of news, and so you loved it. And so now let's take you into college. Where were you going?
So I had very concrete plans. I could see it all. I wanted to be a local news anchor.
Okay.
In a prominent city news market. I was targeting the southwestern part of the United States because I wanted to be warmer in the winter, and I had a real love of the Spanish language, and I used to speak it beautifully, and I thought that would be a good thing to have in the Southwest. And so I go to college, University of Southern Colorado in Pueblo, and I was on a speech team scholarship. Right, highly recommend the speech team to everybody out there. And I finished that, and I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. Back then, you had to call this number, 1-800-MEDIA line, and that's how you found out what jobs were available around the country. And when you're starting out in television journalism, local TV news, you get paid so little, just so little. And actually, back then, in order to get into TV, you really had to start in radio. But I didn't want to do my radio experience after graduation. So I worked at the local school station, but also at KCCY FM 96.9 in Pueblo and Colorado Springs. And it was the local country music station.
Oh, very nice. Were you a DJ? You were on the air?
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And I worked overnights for minimum wage. I think it was like $3.25 an hour or something like that.
My first minimum wage job was $4.25 an hour. So that's about right. That's about right. Yeah.
Yep. So, I finished, and then one of the professors at the school said, "May I see you for a moment?" And I came in, and he said, "There's a graduate school program in Illinois. It's a 10-month program. It's very competitive. Only 18 people get in a year. But you do the first semester is academics, the second semester is like 2 classes, but you will be you will be one of the broadcast interns that works at one of the either 3 TV stations or the 3 radio stations. And the CBS affiliate station was the most competitive one. You compete for those. Anyway, I got into that grad school program. I went there. I get through the program. I did a lot of local television covering the state house, a lot of the politics, but I also covered tornadoes and the Martin Luther King Jr. Day Parade. I'll never forget that. It was negative 20 degrees and there were 12 people marching, but I had to cover that story.
Yeah.
Anyway,
in case anybody wants to know if you paid your dues, the answer is in spades.
Exactly. So I finish it, and this is the thing. This is where we take a big turn.
Okay.
Because so now you've seen my vision. I was a child. I thought I was going to do this. I could picture it all. I could see where I was going, and I'm doing the job, and I think, oh boy, I don't like this. I don't like it as much as I thought I was going to. Yeah. The climb is too hard. You'd call 1-800-MEDIA line and try to listen to these jobs, and wow. And so I'm in my head, I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. So I called my dad, and I had to it took a lot of courage for me to say, I think I just got a degree and took out a $15,000 student loan to get a degree in something I don't want to do. And I was so that's a hard call to make. It was a hard call for me to make to my dad.
Sure.
He had a great answer. He said, we'll pick you up after graduation. You'll come home and we'll figure it out.
Oh, good for him. I like that.
Yeah. So I went back to Denver. I was waiting tables at Governor's Park Tavern, and I see a job offer, a job opening as the deputy press secretary for the state Senate president of Colorado. And now I loved watching press briefings. I loved the West Wing television show. I loved all of that. And I guess part of me thought that let me just try to see about this. But in my head, I felt like if I make this decision, if I go and work in politics, that means I'll never, ever get to work in TV. And that's one of the things I write about later on in my life, which is that if you are at one of those crossroads where you're not exactly sure what to do, it doesn't mean that you'll never get to do what you thought about beforehand. That's something that, gosh, I just want that lesson to get pounded into young people's heads. So I ended up ultimately not working at that state house, but going to Washington, D.C., answering phones for a congressman for 6 months before I got picked up and offered a job as not the White House press secretary, the House press secretary for a congressman from Colorado. Yeah. So that's really how I ended up getting my start there.
Well, that's what I want people to hear, and specifically women. I've got 2 boys and a daughter, and Josie's 13, and I love what you're doing to help encourage women, because I think we have seen some tremendous strides. We still need to see more. But whether you're a woman or a man, I want you to hear what Dana just shared. You know, I wrote a book entitled The Proximity Principle, right? Which is just simply says, in order to do what you want to do, you got to be around people that are doing it and in places where it is happening. I love the story here that you go and you're answering phones for 6 months, and you're in D.C., and D.C., above all other worlds, is more proximity than any other world. I mean, it is just simply the case. You know that. And then all of a sudden, you're a press secretary, deputy press secretary for a House member.
Yeah, I was actually the full.
Oh, you were the full press secretary.
Well, for a House member, because that's like
right. It's not what they see of you.
It is a big deal. Like for me, then that was a big deal.
Well, how old were you?
22.
That's
23.
the point I'm making. So that quickly, you're a press secretary for a congressman.
Ken, let me just tell you something. You're going to love this story. First of all, if people knew that most of Washington, D.C. is run by 23-year-olds.
100%.
It might explain a lot.
Well, it does. It does.
But here's something else I try to tell people. You have to get out and do things.
Yes.
And back then it was easy. You almost had to go out more because there was nothing to do at home. Right. You didn't have phones, you didn't have the internet or anything like that. So I had been there for 6 weeks. I was answering phones for one congressman from Colorado. And Coors Brewing Company put out word in around the Capitol that they were inviting anybody from Colorado to go to a Colorado Avalanche game to play the Washington Capitals in D.C. And they were going to buy the tickets, and they were going to have the bus. And this is before the lobbying gift ban.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
So I made a few friends, not many, but just a few. And they said, are you going to go to the game? Let me ask anybody listening, how much do you think I know about hockey? Absolutely nothing. So I was like, I know it's played on ice, but I said, oh, I don't know. I don't really know anyone. And my friend says, how are you going to meet people? Come with us. And so I said, okay. And I sit next to a guy who worked for Senator Mark Hatfield, who was from Oregon, but he had gone to a college in Colorado. This is how these connections get made. Talk about the proximity principle. Right. I'm sitting next to him just randomly. And he says, so what do you want to do in D.C.? I said, well, I'd love to work my way up to be a House press secretary one day. And he said, oh, do you know Congressman Dan Schaefer from Colorado? I said, well, of course I know who he is, but I never had a chance to meet him. He goes, well, his press secretary just got a new job as the chief of staff to Nathan Deal. And they're looking for somebody from Colorado with any sort of media experience to take over her role. Wow. You got to meet her. And you know what I said, Ken? I said, my heart wanted that job so badly.
Yeah.
But my head said,
you don't have
I think it would be wrong for me to have just accepted a job for Congressman Scott McInnis and only been there for 6 weeks. So while it's a great opportunity, I wouldn't be able to apply. It just would be wrong. And to his credit, he said, you have no idea how this town works. And he made me meet Janelle Guerrero 2 days later on the 5th floor of the Cannon House office building. Ultimately, when I did get a chance to meet the congressman who was hiring, he wanted to hire me, offered me the job, and he said, would it be okay with you if I called Congressman Scott McInnis and asked permission to hire you?
Nice touch.
Right?
Yeah.
And I've worked for so many great people who will anticipate a young person's need, think about that, and go the extra mile so that I didn't have all of that anxiety. Yeah. And also, to Scott McInnis's credit, the congressman who was losing me, every year I get a letter from him saying, I knew you'd make it big.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It was an incredible experience. And so that started my career as a spokesperson.
Yeah. So you made the jump. So now
Yeah.
you've been a press secretary twice in a very short amount of time. So how
Yeah.
long were you there? And I guess the question is how do you then get connected to W and the White House?
So one of the great things about Capitol Hill and the proximity principle that we're talking about here is that you meet a ton of people.
Yeah.
One of the best things about going to Washington, I don't care if young people don't have any desire to work in politics. I strongly believe that an internship or a 1 to 2 year stint on Capitol Hill will pay dividends for the rest of your life, no matter what you go into.
Without question.
So I made so many friends. I worked there for almost 3 years. My personal life, I was part of this church group, singles group, at the Lutheran Church of the Reformation. It's a church that's just right behind the Supreme Court. And our singles group was pretty active. We would get together every Wednesday night for potluck supper. And on Sundays, we would usually do, after church, we'd do some sort of big bike ride or some sort of activity. And I had just gone for like 3 years of no dating, no prospects, nothing. And now I'm 25 and I'm thinking, wow, I'm having I didn't know what it was called at the time, but I called it the quarter life crisis. Everything that I had planned, all my dreams, all that vision of being a local news anchor in the Southwest, using my Spanish, married with 2 kids by the time I'm 32, and all of these things, none of it was happening. And I was having a bit of a crisis. And I remember this woman in our group pulled me aside and she said, you have to remember what the Bible says over and over again, which is to fear not, that you are written in the palm of his hand and he is not going to forget you. And over the next couple of weeks, I felt a little bit better and thought, let me just live my life a little bit. I really loved my job. It was great. And then I meet this guy on an airplane. And he's British. There's so many reasons why we should never be together, but we just celebrated our 24th wedding anniversary last
congratulations.
week. And thank you. And so I had a big choice to make, right? I was 25. He lived in England. He's 18 years older than me. I had this great career prospects that are ongoing. I had lots of friends that worked all across on both sides of the aisle on Capitol Hill. And I was afraid of what people would think about my decision if I were to make a decision to be in England. But I wanted to be with this man that I loved. And a family friend said, do not give up this opportunity to be loved. And one of my principles of my book, my best advice is choosing to be loved is not a career limiting decision.
That's right.
And in fact, it's actually been the most important thing that happened to me to help my career.
Yeah.
So when we come back to the United States, we decided to live in San Diego because who wouldn't want to live there?
Right.
Turns out I was really bored and I wanted to work in Washington again. And I kept all my friends, but a lot of my friends had left Capitol Hill in 1998 to go work for Governor George W. Bush when he ran for president. So in August of 2001, I went to Washington and met up with a bunch of friends and said, God, I'd love to come back. If you hear of any jobs, let me know. Peter and I'd be willing to move back. Go home. I don't really have any leads. And then 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And my friend from the Justice Department, Mindy Tucker, she called me and she said, would you still be willing to come to DC even after all of this? And I said, yes. She said, well, I need another spokesperson at DOJ. Would you be willing to come? So that's how I got hooked up in the Bush administration.
Wow. So you go to the Department of Justice and you're served there. So I want to pause on some of your story because you talked about fear, and we talk a lot about this on the show every day because, as you know, we take live callers and people deal with so much fear and doubt when it comes to pursuing purpose. And it's a constant wrestling match, I find, between the head and the heart. Right? So the heart is clear, but the head tries to talk it out of it. And that's where fear and doubt come in, those voices, fear of failure, fear of rejection, then doubt that I don't have what it takes, doubt that anybody will give me a shot. And I'm just curious, what you would say from your own journey of dealing with fear and doubt and how you overcome those even to this day, because you're in we talk about DC. And it's big time stakes. And certainly when you became a public figure and, and keep rising up the ranks as you did, how did you overcome fear and doubt? And specifically, before you answer the overcome part, where did you see it pop up the most for you? Fear and doubt.
Oh, gosh. Oh, this is like therapy, huh?
No, because I
love
think
it. No,
we like to
good.
get real and raw here, because people are going to
it.
learn from you.
Yeah. Even when I was a little kid, I was always afraid people wouldn't like me or that people would be mad at me. Denver Public Schools was one of the first to, well, it was the first city to try integrating the schools by busing. And so K through third grade, I walked to school 2 blocks away. Fabulous situation. And in the 4th grade, when they started this, I had to be bused 20 miles into the city. And my situation was really tough. I was one of 3 white kids in the school. There was, I guess you could call it bullying, I guess. I would just say that it was really tough. And I remember I started this rote prayer of constantly saying, I hope they're not mad at me today. Please help for them not to be mad at me tomorrow. I was always worried about what's going to happen the next day. And eventually, even after trying, my parents were advocates of integrating the schools. But it got to be the point where I was regressing academically because there just was so many challenges. Fast forward, my parents had moved out to the rural part of the county. My mom and dad both grew up in Wyoming, so being out there was, natural for them.
Yeah.
And so I move out there, and I would say, where were my other? I would say always wanting to be liked, and that's a thing that comes up a lot with all people, but certainly with women.
Yeah, right.
Women have this all the time, and I didn't have Instagram and Snapchat and all of those things, which in some ways validates your desire to be liked, but also can destroy you.
Question.
And I think that these challenges for young people today, both men and boys and girls, and for their parents, is it's a problem that I wish that we could solve. We won't do it on this podcast. I also had a big fear on finances. Yeah. I was always afraid I wasn't going to be able to pay my bills. I could always pay my bills. I worked, but I was kind of person, boy, Dave Ramsey would think this is crazy. I would pay my student loan 3 months in advance because I'd be afraid that I wouldn't have the money to pay for the student loan in the future.
Interesting.
I remember actually that the fear of money, or the fear of not having enough money, when we finally moved to San Diego, and now Peter's doing a startup and I have the full-time job at the time as Peter was working on the business. I remember I read something in a Christian magazine that said, one of the things that you can do to alleviate your anxiety about money, if you're comfortable, is to turn over the finances to your spouse. So I was like, well, Peter's really good with numbers and money. So I did that. And that was probably year 1 of our marriage. And I have never thought about it since.
Interesting.
I have complete and total trust. I get an update a couple of times a year.
Yeah.
Obviously now I'm in a position where I'm making a lot more money than we were back then, when we were wondering if we had enough money to go to Rubio's. But I think that the money angle for me was a big deal.
Yeah.
And then I would say the most nervous I have ever been in my entire life, the biggest fear, where I sweated through my dress, was one time when I was on Celebrity Jeopardy for charity.
Oh, I missed that one. That's fun.
Oh, and I had to stand next to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and I'm 5 feet tall.
Yeah.
Right. I was so nervous. But also on the day of my first White House press briefing, I was just worried about what I was going to say.
Of course.
Blah, blah, blah. And I get a call from Secretary Margaret Spellings. She was head of education department. And they said, the secretary's on the phone for you. I'm like, oh, okay. So I pick up in my office. Madam Secretary, how are you? She says, good. How are you? And I said, well, not very good. How am I supposed to fill in for Tony Snow? I can't fill his shoes. And I complain and whine for a couple of minutes. And then she says, well, you better put on your big girl panties and deal with it.
That's right.
Right? There was no coddling. There was no like, oh, you're going to be fine. She was like, you're going to have to deal with it. And that was the right advice.
Yeah.
So I would say now my fears have lessened with age a little bit, but also during all of those times when I have been the most fearful, for me, my faith and prayer has helped the most.
Yeah. Love that. It's kept you grounded. Yeah. So here you are, you become deputy press secretary. We're fast forwarding here. And so you meet the president the first time. And I had the privilege to interview him 2 years ago at our huge leadership event, and I couldn't believe I'd heard how charming he was and down to earth. And I interviewed him for an hour in front of 6,000 leaders. So that's a whole different weird world.
I just did the same thing last Monday.
Did you?
With him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got
an event in Dallas.
I got to tell you, he was so unbelievably charming and hilarious. But I'm just curious, and I asked him at one point in the interview, I said, I've done a lot of research and I've read that your whole career you've been known for giving people nicknames to the point that he's famous for it. And I said, I'm just curious, was that an intentional leadership thing? And so anyway, he basically went on to say, yeah, I'm the most powerful person in the world. And I realized that if I did that, I could put people at ease. I'm just curious about when you first start to work with him. Here you are, you're a female. This is one of the most powerful men in the world, the most powerful man in the world. And even though he was charming to you and very accepting of you, what can women learn from that moment where you're there because of what you can do and you've got the chops? I mean, you earned it, but there you are all of a sudden where you're a voice in that room. I'm just curious what that was like and what you learned from that. What women specifically, my daughter Josie, what can she learn from that experience?
Well, it didn't happen all at once. I was a spokesperson at the Justice Department for about 9 months, and then I got pulled over to the White House to head up communications for the White House Council on Environmental Quality, which oversees all environmental issues and energy issues. So I got so deeply ingrained in all the issues regarding climate change and healthy forests and our oceans, air pollution, you name it. I was really deep on that. And Ari Fleischer and Scott McClellan, press secretary and deputy at the time, knew that anytime they had the New York Times call them about the roadless rule out in the mountain states, that they could send it over to me and I would handle it. So one of the things I always tell people is take the jobs nobody else really wants at the time.
Yeah.
And because in the first term of the Bush administration after 9/11, you wanted to work on terrorism.
Right.
I was working on the environment.
Right. Yeah.
But I did that where they didn't have to worry about it at all. So when the deputy position came open, when Ari moves on, Scott becomes press secretary, there's a change of the personnel going into the second term. I got hired to be the deputy press secretary. I don't remember. I had met the president before then,
right,
but like barely,
right,
shaking a hand.
Yeah,
that was
right,
pretty much it. So I had just started. This is the great story about one embarrassing thing.
Oh, this is you getting kicked out?
Yeah.
This is very exciting.
So I had just started and I was at the communications meeting with our head of communications, Dan Bartlett, who's now head of communications for Walmart. And he says, Dana, I am double booked. And I wondered, could you sit in on an interview that the president needs to do at 11 with a columnist? And it's a 30-minute interview. I just need you to be there, welcome the guy, take notes on the interview, and cut it off after 30 minutes. I'm like, yeah, okay, I can do that. But he could tell I'm nervous because it's going to be in the Oval Office. He says, I will go and do the pre-brief with you, and then I'll go to my other meeting. I said, okay, great. So now I can hide behind Dan as I go into the Oval Office for the first time, and it's so majestic. It's just... I
can't even imagine.
It's America and the Constitution and amazing and the energy. It's all of it. It's
sure.
So talk about it. He says he's the powerful person. He's intimidating in a way, and the room's intimidating.
Right.
But what happened was Bartlett says, Mr. President, Dana's here to, I don't even know he said Dana. He said, you have an interview with this columnist, and she's going to sit in. I don't even know if the president knew my name at the time, but he might have said, Dana's here to do the interview. And the president looked at me and gave me a nod. I'm like, okay. And he says, but Dan, I'm not doing an interview with him. I said I would talk to him. I didn't say I would do an interview with him. And there's been a classic miscommunication.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
Right.
And Dan has told this prominent columnist, that he's going to get an interview with the president. And the president's saying, no, I'm not doing that. Because if I do that, then the Iranians will think I'm negotiating with them through this report. And I'm not going to do that.
Right.
He's welcome to come in, but I'm not doing an interview. And therefore, Dan, she doesn't need to be here.
Oh.
And he looked at my way and went like this. So for you listeners, the head nod towards the door.
Right.
And I felt,
you could let
I'm 5 feet tall. I felt 5 inches tall.
Of course. Of course.
I basically, I don't know how I stayed upright. I wanted to crawl back to my office.
Yeah.
I get to my little tiny office. It had a pocket door, and I closed the door behind me. And when I said that Peter has been my best career asset, I call my husband, and I'm tearful but not crying.
Right.
Trying to be brave. And he says, "What happened?" So I tell him the whole story. And he said, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing, because for the rest of your life, you can say, I've been kicked out of better places than this."
Yes. He spun it for you.
So 5 years later, I was doing the press for the president's book tour in the post-presidency. And we were on a flight, just shooting the breeze about things. And I said, "Hey, Mr. President, do you remember when you kicked me out of the Oval Office?" And he said, "I never kicked you out of the Oval Office." I said, "Oh, yes, you did. Don't you remember? Because you said you didn't want to do an interview, and Dan said this, and blah, 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 blah. And then you said, and then he said, "Wait, are you still upset?" And I said, "A little bit." I could remember every moment of that humiliation of getting kicked out of the Oval Office, but it's also become one of my favorite stories. And he said, "I think you can let it go now. I was never mad at you."
Right, exactly. That's so great.
So that's just, but to answer that's a story that doesn't exactly answer your question about young girls and thinking about these things, which is one, I have a strong belief in being the most well-read person in the room.
Yeah.
And when I was press secretary, I read everything constantly. I was up at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
And I wanted everybody in that room to know that I know more than you.
Right.
And that was power for me, right?
Sure.
The other thing is you have to find your strong voice. A lot of young people today, maybe your daughter's age, but even older, I hear it sometimes in the workplace. Do you know when people talk like this and at the end of every sentence, they're...
It's dripping of insecurity.
It's called up talking, and I can't stand it.
Oh, that's
and
good.
it is. I think that it is hurting, especially young women. It is hurting their ability to get jobs, to get a promotion, to get the opportunity, and we have an obligation as the older generation now to gently take them aside and privately say, "You might not even realize you're doing this, but it's holding you back, and you have to find your strong voice." I just did an event last week with Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia with 5th graders. And when we were doing Q&A, and we were in a gymnasium, we were asking them to raise their hand, and they all and there's like so little confidence. So I did an exercise with them. I was like, "Everybody talk like that for a second." And they did. And I said, "Now pretend like you can talk from here. And use this power. God gave you all this power right here."
That's right.
And you can control that. The other thing is, I think humility and grace go a long way. You know, if the president asked a question and I didn't know the answer, I didn't ever fake it. I would say, I don't have that answer for you right now, but I'll get it to you by the hour. And that would be appreciated by him. I just learned so much about leadership and principles from him that I really think followed from my childhood, growing up on the ranch and with my own family and in the church. I felt very at home with him. Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit more about you. We teach here on the show that you're on purpose in your professional life when you use what you do best, that's your talent, to do work that you really love, that's passion, to produce results from that work that you care deeply about, that's mission. And so I'm just curious, because I want to keep following this arc, because I love how your dad planted the seed in you, and now to see, after serving in the highest office of the land, serving that great, powerful institution of the presidency, and now here you are at the top of your game back in news. I'm curious, and these are just quick hits, all right? What would you say you're most talented at? What would you say your top 2 or 3 talents, in your words? What would you say they are?
2 or 3. So I think one of the things is I have a huge amount of empathy. Remember I said I was always afraid people would be mad at me?
Yep.
I'm always looking and trying to see, how are people going to react to this word or this phrase or this tone? And being able to anticipate that. And to even, sometimes my colleagues get annoyed. In fact, one time Brian Kilmeade was on the 5 filling in for Greg, and he was going down a path where he said something that I knew was going to be taken the wrong way. So before we went to break, I said, what Brian actually meant to say was this. And we went to the commercial break and he said, "Why do you have to be everybody's press secretary?" I was just trying to help. I also think that I can see around corners. I have gut instincts about problems that are coming. And I think maybe that's because of the fear of the unknown, wanting to get in front of things before anything goes bad. I don't want anything to go wrong. I don't want anybody to be mad, like try to get ahead of that.
Right.
I am also an incredibly fast reader with an excellent memory, which my husband says is both a blessing and a curse.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's true. So interesting when I hear people say that. I don't know if this is you. I can't do math or science. That part of my brain is completely dark. It's troubling. But I do have the ability to read. And when I read like a prompter or audiobooks or whatever, the words I'm saying are 2 sentences behind my eyes. Do you understand what I'm saying when I say that? You can get your eyes get out there way in front, and it's like you have strong verbal skills. So that we've got empathy, vision, and strong verbal skills. All right, so that's a fun top 3. All right, now, how would you describe what really gives you the juice, as I like to say? So you love this type of work, so either a task or maybe a role. What comes to mind? Would you say top 2 or 3 things top of mind?
One of the great things about being in the role that I'm in journalism is that you can sometimes affect change. And, oftentimes not necessarily, but when you can have impact journalism, I think it makes a huge difference. I'll give you one example that didn't have to do with me per se, but a friend of mine worked on 60 Minutes and for Mike Wallace. And he said that was the toughest boss he's ever seen in his life. And have you ever heard of the KIPP schools?
Yeah, actually.
Okay. They're like a private, it's like a school choice type of thing and a way to educate children that's done very, very well, especially they started at inner city Philadelphia. And my friend had heard about this school and he pitches it to Mike Wallace 3 times and gets batted back. Like, this is the stupidest pitch I've ever heard. Try again. Finally, Mike Wallace says, fine, we'll do it. It won't rate. And then you'll learn your lesson. So I think that was just kind of his way. He was kind of a crotchety older guy.
Right.
So they go and they do that. And the next morning, the KIPP schools at 8:00 in the morning get a phone call from Seattle, Washington. And Bill Gates is on the phone. And he wants to give them $60 million in order to continue to spread this message.
Wow.
And he talked about that as like one of the reasons you go into this work is so that you can affect change. Like if you can get justice for somebody, or if you can, for example, sometimes it's fundraising. I'm very active with a group called Mercy Ships, which is a charitable surgical ship that services the west coast of Africa. And my husband and I went there one time and we were given equipment by Fox. Peter's never been a photographer in his life or videographer. He really got into it. And we came back and gave the raw footage and my interviews to the team here at Fox, these young people who packaged it all together. And it ran on air, I think 5 or 6 times, and it had a big impact of support for Mercy Ships and awareness. So I think I love that part about it. The other thing I love is when I might be able to make a connection from one person to the next that results in some sort of career progression or success.
Right.
So one of the reasons I write.
How much of that is, I interrupt, I'm sorry, but how much of that do you think is because you benefited so much from that?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to pass it on. I started Minute Mentoring, which is a speed dating, but mentoring. But the only thing I would say to the girls that got invited is that we're not charging you for this. All we are asking you is that you pass it on to the next generation. That's your obligation. Yeah. And it's actually fun now in your career at this age to be able to actually help people.
Yeah, you get tremendous joy out of it. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I do. 100%. And that's I very much find that to be true for me. I mean, not just that I do it every day and I'm trying to help people find what they love and then do it well, but I wouldn't be here if Dave Ramsey doesn't listen to me on the stealth. I didn't know he was listening. And then he says, hey, come join me. And what he's done for me is I could never have done on my own, not even close, And so he's just one example. But I think that's really great.
If I could add one other thing, it is helping people understand what is going on in politics in Washington. Yeah. So synthesizing the information and trying to explain it in a way that they might not have heard before or that can make them feel a little bit better. look, we work in news. It's not always a positive thing, but I do
Right.
try to remind people that we have a lot more in common than the media might suggest.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with some common ground and our
Mm-hmm.
values and go from there.
Yeah. All right. So this was just a little fun thing. So I wrote down what she does best, folks. Empathy. I wrote down vision.
Okay.
And then obviously you've got tremendous verbal skills. Then the work that you love, informing, advocating, connecting. Right? I just wrote that down. There's no right, wrong way to say this. And then the results that matter most to you. I just wrote down awareness and influence. And you want to influence people in a positive way. That probably gives you the most satisfaction. If you go, at the end of the day, I did a good job, whether it's in your minute mentoring, in your own world, or it's something on the 5 or American Newsroom or whatever it is, or you're speaking at a gym in West Virginia, influence is what drives you. Is that safe to say?
Yes, although I have never put that.
How would you put it?
I have never come to. Well, I haven't. I don't know. I think this is such a great question, and I think the way that you synthesize that and put it all together does make a lot of sense. And I do get a lot of satisfaction in helping other people achieve things. So that's influence.
Yeah.
People to understand things. That's influence. Yes, I think that that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanted people to see, because so many times we get to do interviews like this with people of influence, and I want people to see what is underneath so they can see themselves. Like, they may never be on national television or work in the White House, but the fact is, I believe that we were all created to contribute. David says in Psalm 139, 13 and 14, my favorite scripture, and he literally is writing a psalm to God, and he says, "You knew me in the womb." All right, I'm paraphrasing. You knit me. The language he uses is, "You knit me together in my mother's womb." And I know that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made in good works and all those things. And so I want people to see that you really enjoy what you do, not so much because of the limelight, but because of the underneath part and what really motivates you, because you've been given tremendous influence. You are still young.
Can I give you one example of that?
Yes, please do.
I think it might be kind of interesting for people to hear. During COVID, Greg Gutfeld got a message on his email from a couple in Florida who were trying to figure out a way to get Governor DeSantis, who had been following the federal guidelines, to loosen restrictions so that they could visit their autistic son who was in a home for autistic children. And routine is so important to people with autism. And all of a sudden, everyone's world were upended. But imagine if you need your routine to survive, and all of a sudden your mom and dad who come to see you every day, they're not there. And everybody's in a mask. And it was so confusing. And it was making things much, much worse for the child. And so they sent a note to Greg Gutfeld. Gutfeld happened to see the email. We got a lot of emails. I'm sure you do too.
Sure.
Saw the email, and I had the daily briefing show at the time, and he sent me a note and he said, "I don't know if this is something you might want to do on the show, but I just feel like we should maybe consider doing something." So fast forward, I did have this couple on the show, and they respectfully asked Governor DeSantis to change the rules. And sure enough, the governor's office saw the story, saw the interview, reached out to the couple, and within a week or two, those guidelines had been changed, not just for this family, but for all the families that were going through that. And so that's a kind of influence that we can have. We don't get to do it every day, but we try to.
Yeah. And that's the positive side of the news. Okay, a couple fun questions here, because I want to take the opportunity to let the audience get to know you a little bit better. We know you love dogs. If you follow Dana on Instagram, you must be the all-time greatest dog mom ever. I don't know if anybody's ever given you that title, but
I think I'll take it.
I think you're up there. I think it's going to be hard to find somebody that's above you. So she's a great follow on Instagram, by the way, at Dana Perino. But I got to ask you, do you enjoy the 5 more than you do what I think is the smoothest dude on television, Bill Hemmer? I had an opportunity to have dinner with him a couple times at some of our Ramsey media events.
Oh, yeah. Up here in New York, he loves those.
He's such a kind dude, and he's
Very
so
good person.
smooth. Tell us about the 5 and tell us about working with Hemmer real quick, because I only got about 7 minutes with you.
Okay, so the Five was supposed to be a 5-week temporary show. I had been in Africa doing some advocacy work for maternal and children's health, and I was getting my bags at baggage claim in Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And I get a call from John Finley of Fox News asking if I'd come up for 5 weeks, temporary show in the summer, until they figured out what they were going to do with the 5 p.m. slot that Glenn Beck was vacating.
Right.
And I was like, oh, of all the things I do, I loved doing Fox Hits the most, but who wants to live in Manhattan in July and August?
Right.
That's the worst time
it's terrible.
of the summer for here. But I said yes. And I called my husband who was in Korea. Again, he keeps coming back up, right? And I said, can you believe this? And I tell him the ask, and he said, oh, congratulations. I said, why? He said, this is what you always wanted to do.
Yes. Full circle.
And as a kid, I remember one of the things I wanted to do was to not just be a local news anchor. I wanted to be a panelist, a guest on a Sunday show.
Of course.
I used to have an argument with my sister about going to early service versus late service on Sunday, because if we went to early service plus Sunday school, we got home in time to watch Meet the Press.
The Tim Russert, the greatest of all time.
Yes. And also, and my sister would be so annoyed with me.
By the way, that's not normal, but I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's not normal at all. So I sit we sit down to do the Five. Nobody has any expectations of what the show is going to be. Nobody knows each other really that well.
Wow.
Greg and I sat down for the first time we've ever had a conversation, and we're seated next to each other because we're the shortest, and for the lighting purposes,
of course, right,
they had to have us together, and we hit it off so well that Suzanne Scott, the current CEO of Fox News, who started the Five, she said she was in the control room for the first 5 minutes and said, this show's going to be fine. Yeah. And so that was in 2011, and
number
we are
one
in our
rated
12th
show.
Year.
Number one rated
show. Yeah, we're in
show.
our 12th year.
Wow.
I love it so much, but I also love the news. Yeah. And again, Suzanne Scott, she knew how best to utilize my talents, and now I have the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
I get to do the news in the morning with an incredibly gracious and generous colleague who is joyous in his work. That's Bill Hemmer. Yeah. And then later in the day, even though it's a long day for me, I get to be with my pals on the Five. Yeah. So I kind of have the best of both worlds. And I love doing election night coverage too.
Oh, I can't get away from it. The big board has changed political coverage. John King made it famous. Now Bill's doing a great job, and MSNBC's got
Bill
some guy.
That's a lot of work. It's almost like he's got flashcards so that he can know all of these races.
To know that and to be able to move on that board, it's fantastic stuff. All right, I want to honor your time. I've got 5 minutes left. I want to use all 5 minutes. What we've talked about today, I think, has been, I hope, a tremendous encouragement to people. And the title of your last book, Everything is Going to Be Okay. I mean, it is. And yet it doesn't feel like that. I want to give you the last word. Speak to people right now who aren't where they want to be. There's a gap between where they are and where they want to be. Might be financial, might be professional, might be relational, all the things. What would you say to them from your journey to encourage their heart right now to keep going?
I think I'd go back to what my colleague and friend at the church group had said to me, which is to fear not. I do feel, Ken, that I worried my 20s away. And I don't want anyone to have to do that because it's not necessary. If you are an educated American, right now, there's a lot of opportunity. There's challenges, but there's so much opportunity for you. And you won life's great lottery by being born in America.
Yeah.
We are a free country. We got our problems, but I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Yeah. So there's that. The other thing is, life is a decision-making experience. And instead of feeling weighed down by the decisions in front of you, embrace choices. You get to make decisions. You get to choose. Everybody gets a choice. And you can decide how you want to live your day. Like I don't like to say have a nice day. I'd like to say either have a great day or have a consequential day.
Oh,
have a day that matters.
Yeah.
Have a day that matters. Your life matters. And truthfully, in the end, Ken, everything will be okay.
That's right. That's correct.
So how you live your life from birth until the Lord decides it's the end, you have to know that at the end, everything will be okay. And therefore, all of this time that we spend on earth worrying is wasted energy. So how can you take that energy of all of that worry and convert it into energy that fuels you? You can do it, but it's a choice. You have to decide to do it. And I think shows like yours and what you and Dave Ramsey do, it's incredibly helpful to people, because here's the other thing. You're not the only ones going through it.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely everybody in the world has problems. So live outside yourself as well. Self-care is great. Great. But get outside yourself. Do you know, Ken, that they've now showed that every time you are kind to somebody else, it releases endorphins as if you were exercising?
Yep.
So why not be more kind?
Yeah.
And get those feelings in your life. You can do it to anybody that you run into. Send a note to somebody that you haven't heard from in a while. Take that time to reach outside, but living outside yourself is a great way to make sure that you are having a great life in between those 2 points of life and death.
Amen. That is good. You are a model of grace, class, certainly kindness, and I know you're very, very busy. You've been very kind to me and some of the projects that I've done, and I always enjoy being on the air with all of the Fox personalities, but you're doing good work, and what you've done today in taking out of your valuable time to share your heart, your story is going to touch somebody, and we don't take that lightly. So you've made us better. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's really good to know you, and I hope that we see each other in person one day soon, but it's good to see you on this video.
Absolutely.